England bleeds from civil war. Two royal houses, York and Lancaster, tear the realm apart. Skirmishes grow into pitched battles. As the young Edward of York rises to avenge his father, the Lancastrian cause rallies behind the seasoned Duke of Somerset, and all eyes turn to Towton, where the fate of the crown will be decided in blood. 1461. The snow fell sideways, the wind howled like a curse, and on the fields of Towton, the blood of England turned the snow to slush. They say 20,000 died that day, perhaps more. Brother slew brother. Neighbours carved each other into legend. It was the bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil, where sons were cut down before their fathers' eyes, and loyalty ended with a blade. Great slaughter there was, for the fight endured 10 hours in the cruelest manner. Gregory's Chronicle, 15th century. It was not just a battle, it was a national exorcism, a reckoning in steel, a Yorkist victory, but at what cost? The crown had been won by muscle and marrow, not mandate. And wounds like these scar the soul of a kingdom. Out of the red-stained snow rose Edward of York, tall, charismatic, ruthless, the first king in years with iron in his spine. His court dazzled. His rule promised order. England, exhausted by strife, might finally breathe. But behind every golden throne lies a man who helped lift it and expects it back in kind. The Kingmaker, having given away the crown, now found himself wanting to wear its shadow. Warwick, once the maker of kings, now uneasy. He had made Edward king, but Edward was no puppet. Then came the Queen, Elizabeth Woodville, a commoner, a widow, a woman with ambition in her smile. To Warwick, she was an insult. To the nobles, a threat. The new Queen's family rose swiftly, too swiftly. Brothers, uncles, cousins, given lands, titles, power. The court, once a circle of steel, now swirled with Woodville silk. The old guard gritted their teeth. And so, the alliances twisted again. Warwick and Margaret, former enemies, now shared a table and a plan. The red rose had not wilted. It merely waited. And now, with Warwick's hand, it would rise again. They struck swiftly. In 1470, Warwick and Edward's own brother, George, Duke of Clarence, who had married Warwick's daughter, Isabel Neville, rebelled. Richard, too, would later marry Anne Neville, Warwick's younger daughter and the widow of Prince Edward of Lancaster. These marriages were not unions of love, but the cunning cobwebs of Warwick the Kingmaker, or rather the lineage maker, who sought to bind York and Lancaster into the palm of his hand. The realm quaked again. Edward IV was forced to flee across the Channel, unseated, exiled, and hunted like a stag through winter woods. For a brief moment, the old king returned. Henry VI, feeble and bewildered, was lifted from the shadows of the tower and crowned once more. A hollow crown for a hollow king. It was called the readeption, but it was no restoration. Behind the throne stood Warwick, draped in velvet, holding the strings. Yet triumph tastes bitter when shared. Warwick's uneasy alliance with Margaret of Anjou trembled. She returned from exile with her son, Prince Edward, and her own fire. The Kingmaker had summoned a queen, but she had not come to kneel. In the spring of 1471, Edward returned. He landed in Yorkshire with little more than faith and the wind. But momentum is a strange thing. it clings to the bold. Lords rallied to him. Old loyalties flared like torches in the dark. Then, another turn. George, Duke of Clarence, ever the political weather vane, sensed which way the breeze blew. He abandoned Warwick and the Lancastrian dream, crawling back to Edward in a grand performance of brotherly repentance. His betrayal shattered the fragile alliance. Warwick's house of cards began to fall. By Edward's side rode his youngest brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, loyal, quiet, fierce. Where Clarence schemed, Richard stood. He had bled beside Edward in exile and would become his iron right hand. At just 18, Richard commanded men in battle with a coldness born not of cruelty, but of duty. At Barnet, beneath a fog that swallowed flags and blurred faces, York met York. Confusion reigned. The mist turned friend to foe. Lancastrian soldiers struck down their own. The Earl of Oxford's men, mistaken for enemies, fell to friendly blades. What should have been coordination became catastrophe. Warwick, the Kingmaker, died in the chaos, not on a throne, but in a butcher's cart. Richard was there, leading the charge through the haze, steel drawn, and then the final reckoning. At Tewkesbury, Edward crushed the last hope of Lancaster. Prince Edward of Lancaster, Margaret's only son, was cut down before her eyes. Margaret herself was taken, and that same night, Henry VI died in the Tower. Some said of grief. Others whispered Edward's hand. But Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was there, and silence has its own voice. With Lancaster's blood washed from the field, Edward IV ruled unchallenged. England exhaled. But breath does not mean peace. Peace returned, but trust did not. At court, old wounds festered behind silken smiles. Clarence, that ever-restless brother, chafed again. Whispers turned to accusations. In 1478, he was executed. Drowned, they say, in a butt of Malmsey wine. A toast to ambition. And its end. The Woodvilles flourished. Queen Elizabeth bore the king many children, seeds for a golden age. But the roots tangled. Her family grew in power. Brothers, uncles, cousins, rising like ivy on palace walls. The old nobility watched with clenched jaws. Richard, forged in war and tempered in silence, was made Lord of the North, a title reserved for those who could be trusted with the edge of a kingdom. While the court simmered in London, he kept the peace in the borderlands, against Scots, against bandits, against the memory of rebellion. He ruled with discipline, feared, respected, alone. Edward, once a lion, grew heavier, slower. Years of pleasure dulled his edge, and then, in 1483, at just 40, death came quietly, and everything he had built began to tremble. The crown passed to his son, Edward V. But in England, crowns are never passed. They are taken and rarely kept.